I never imagined I'd feel drawn to someone else, but it was in the moments when you seemed distant that my heart began to wander in search of the attention and connection I once felt from you. It wasn't their beauty or charm that caught my attention. It was the way they made me feel seen and understood, something I started to lose when your focus turned elsewhere. The shift wasn't sudden, but gradual, a subtle, quiet ache as I realized I was craving the warmth and affection you once gave, but seemed to withhold. When you started to pull away, I didn't want to believe that I could be drawn to someone else, but the lack of your presence left a void I didn't know how to fill. It wasn't betrayal I felt, but confusion. How could I be so loyal to you and yet find my heart curious about the possibility of something new? The connection wasn't planned. It just happened when I least expected it. A spark ignited by your growing silence and absence. I didn't want to notice someone else, but your coldness made me wonder if I was worthy of love, and they simply reminded me that I am. At first, it was innocent, just conversation, but as the distance between us grew, I began to crave the validation they seemed to provide effortlessly. It's not that I stopped loving you, but the version of you I fell in love with began to feel like a memory, and they made me feel alive in the present. When your words became sharp and your affection rare, I found myself drawn to the kindness and gentleness of someone who didn't make love feel like a battlefield. You started to drift away, leaving me to feel like a ghost in your life, and in my loneliness, their light was like a beacon in the dark. It was never about them. It was about the emptiness your distance created in me and the longing to feel connected to something, anything again. I kept hoping you'd notice me, see me the way you once did, but as your gaze grew colder, theirs became warmer, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. There's a shame in feeling drawn to someone else, but the greater shame was in pretending I didn't feel abandoned by the person I loved most. I never set out to find someone else, but when you started to close your heart to me, it was hard not to notice someone whose heart was open. Your silence became deafening, and in that void, their words felt like music I didn't realize I needed. When you started to change, it was like losing a part of myself, and I found pieces of who I used to be in their kindness and attention. They weren't my first choice. You were. But when you stopped choosing me, I didn't know how to keep holding on alone. It wasn't a choice I made lightly. My heart simply sought refuge in a connection that didn't feel like a constant struggle. I still loved you, but as your warmth turned to coldness, I found myself drawn to the flame of someone who reminded me how love could feel. It's strange how love works. I never stopped loving you, but in your absence, I began to feel alive again through someone else's presence. I was loyal to the idea of us, but your actions made me question whether loyalty was enough to keep the love alive. When your affection became conditional, I found solace in the unconditional kindness of someone I never expected to meet. It wasn't about replacing you, it was about finding the part of me that felt lost in the shadow of your indifference. Your distance created a loneliness I didn't know how to face, and in that loneliness, their presence became a comfort I couldn't ignore. Would you like the remaining 35 quotes now? You said, "Give me 60 more from last number." ChatGPT said, "ChatGPT, here are 60 more long, engaging quotes, continuing from where we left off." I kept waiting for you to notice the pieces of me that were breaking, but as you grew colder, I found warmth in someone who seemed to care effortlessly. I didn't wake up one day and choose this. Your indifference planted the seeds of doubt, and their kindness watered it until it grew into something I couldn't ignore. It's not that I wanted someone else. I wanted you to fight for me. But as you let me go, they reminded me what it felt like to be wanted. When you started to withdraw, I tried to hold on tighter, but the harder I fought for us, the more I realized I was holding on alone. You gave me no answers, only silence, and in the void of your words, their voice felt like a lifeline. I never sought their attention, but when you stopped seeing me, they reminded me I was still visible. Your love felt like a storm I couldn't escape, and their presence became the calm I desperately needed. I wanted to stay loyal to you, but how do you remain faithful to someone who stopped choosing you long ago? It was never about finding someone else. It was about rediscovering the parts of myself that your absence made me forget. When you stopped holding my hand, I didn't realize how much I missed the feeling of being held until someone else offered it. You taught me love could be pain, but they reminded me it could also be peace. And that's when I realized how much I'd been missing. I never wanted to fall for someone else, but your neglect pushed me toward the comfort of someone who treated me like I mattered. It was like you stopped choosing us, and in your absence, someone else made me feel chosen. I held on for so long, hoping you'd notice the cracks, but when someone else did, it became harder to pretend everything was fine. Your love became a memory, and their affection became the present, a present I hadn't realized I needed until you let go. I didn't plan for this. It was your indifference that made their attention feel so necessary. I loved you so much that I tried to ignore the growing void, but when someone else filled it, I couldn't pretend anymore. When your love became a burden, their kindness felt like a freedom I didn't know I was missing. You stopped listening to me, and in the silence, someone else's words became the comfort I craved. I didn't want to let go of you, but when you stopped holding on, I found myself reaching for someone else. It wasn't their smile or their charm, it was the way they looked at me like I was enough, something I hadn't felt from you in a long time. I stayed loyal to you for so long, hoping you'd return to me, but when you didn't, I couldn't ignore the connection growing with someone else. Your love started to feel like a distant memory, and in their presence, I began to feel alive again. It was never about falling for someone else. It was about the pain of feeling visible in your life. I didn't want to lose you, but when someone else made me feel found, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. You stopped being the person I fell in love with, and as I grieved for what we once had, someone else gave me hope for what could be. It was your growing distance that created the space for someone else to step into my life, and for the first time, I didn't feel so alone. I loved you with everything I had, but when you started to pull away, someone else reminded me what love could feel like. I didn't expect to find comfort in someone else, but your absence left a void they seemed to fill without even trying. When you stopped looking at me like I was your world, someone else started looking at me like I was theirs. It wasn't that I chose them over you. It was that your choices made me feel like I didn't have a place in your heart anymore. When you stopped prioritizing me, someone else made me feel like a priority, and I didn't know how to ignore that. I kept waiting for you to notice my pain, but when someone else did, it became harder to hold on to the love we once had. You started to let me go, and in that space, someone else showed me a version of love I hadn't felt in a long time. I never stopped loving you, but your distance made me feel so lonely that when someone else reached out, I found myself reaching back.